There is something about narcissistic behavior that many people never fully understand. Once you recognize it, the way you see these individuals begins to change completely. Behind the confidence that seems impossible to break, behind the charm that wins people over so easily, and behind the image of superiority they constantly present, there is often a hidden emotional struggle that rarely disappears. Many assume narcissists are completely satisfied with themselves. They believe these people enjoy hurting others without ever feeling the consequences. They imagine narcissists moving through life without guilt, without insecurity, and without the emotional pain that affects everyone else. But the reality is much more complex than it first appears. The person hiding behind that confident mask is often carrying emotional wounds that remain unseen. Their strength is frequently a performance designed to protect something much more fragile. The people closest to them may never notice this because the mask is carefully maintained every single day. What you are about to discover offers a different perspective on how this personality works beneath the surface. If you want to better understand manipulation, emotional defense mechanisms, and the hidden patterns that influence human behavior, stay with me until the end. As each layer is uncovered, the behavior that once seemed confusing begins to make much more sense, and it becomes harder to judge people only by what they choose to show the world. The first hidden struggle is one that almost nobody notices because it cannot be seen directly, yet it quietly influences nearly everything they do. It is a deep and ongoing feeling of inner emptiness. On the outside, narcissistic individuals often appear extremely confident. They speak with certainty. They act as though they know exactly who they are and believe they deserve admiration wherever they go. But beneath that carefully constructed image, there is often an unstable sense of identity that leaves them feeling incomplete. This emptiness is not something that appears only during stressful moments. It often remains present even when everything seems to be going well. They notice it during quiet evenings, in moments when nobody is paying attention, when praise disappears, or when they are left alone with their own thoughts. Those silent moments become uncomfortable because there is no audience to reinforce the image they depend upon. As a result, they continuously search outside themselves for something that temporarily covers that uncomfortable feeling. Attention becomes a source of emotional relief. Recognition provides a short-lived sense of importance. Admiration briefly quiets the insecurity they work so hard to hide. But those feelings never last very long. Once the attention fades, the emptiness quietly returns. This is why many narcissistic individuals struggle to enjoy peace or stillness. They often surround themselves with activity, conversations, competition, or constant stimulation because slowing down forces them to face emotions they would rather avoid. What looks like endless confidence is often an attempt to stay one step ahead of painful self-reflection. The second pattern becomes visible in the way they constantly search for something more. At first glance, this can easily be mistaken for ambition or high personal standards. They may appear driven, determined, and unwilling to settle for an average life. While ambition itself is healthy, the motivation behind narcissistic striving is often very different. Instead of working toward meaningful fulfillment, they frequently chase experiences that provide only temporary emotional relief. The excitement of a new achievement fades surprisingly fast. A relationship that once seemed exciting begins losing its appeal. Recognition from others stops feeling satisfying almost as soon as it is received. New goals quickly replace old ones because lasting contentment never truly arrives. This endless search is not always caused by external circumstances. It often reflects an internal struggle that remains unresolved. Genuine fulfillment usually grows from self-acceptance, emotional stability, and a secure sense of identity. When those foundations are weak, outside success cannot permanently fill the gap. No matter how many accomplishments accumulate, the feeling of not enough quietly remains. Instead of looking inward for the source of that discomfort, many continue believing that the next opportunity, the next achievement, or the next relationship will finally provide lasting happiness. Unfortunately, that cycle tends to repeat itself because the emotional wound they are trying to escape cannot be repaired by external success alone. The search continues, the goals become bigger, yet the inner emptiness often remains unchanged. The third hidden struggle is even more difficult to recognize because it is carefully protected from public view. Few people ever see it directly, yet it quietly shapes many of the reactions, relationships, and decisions that follow throughout their lives. Understanding this deeper layer helps explain behaviors that often appear confusing on the surface, and what comes next reveals why so many of their actions are driven by fear rather than genuine confidence. Another hidden struggle is something most people never notice because they only see the confident image presented to the world. What they do not see is how much effort it takes to keep that image alive every single day. Many narcissistic individuals create a version of themselves that appears stronger, smarter, more successful, more attractive, and more important than they secretly believe they are. Over time, this image stops feeling like a simple act. It becomes the identity they rely on to face the world. Protecting it demands constant attention and emotional energy. Imagine waking up every morning feeling as though you must perform perfectly or risk everything falling apart. Imagine believing that if people ever saw your fears, your weaknesses, or your imperfections, they would reject you completely. That pressure can become exhausting. It leaves very little room for authenticity because every interaction feels like another test that must be passed. They carefully watch how others respond to them. They pay close attention to compliments, criticism, facial expressions, and even small changes in someone's attitude. They replay conversations in their minds, searching for signs that their carefully built image may have been damaged. Rather than feeling free to simply be themselves, they often feel trapped by the version of themselves they worked so hard to create. Stay with me, because understanding this explains many reactions that seem completely unreasonable from the outside. Living under that kind of pressure often creates emotional tension that eventually shows itself in different ways. Sometimes it appears as sudden irritation over something that seems insignificant. Sometimes it becomes anger that feels completely out of proportion to the situation. Other times it shows up as emotional distance, cold behavior, or an overwhelming desire to control everything around them. Many people are confused when someone who appears so confident reacts so strongly to even the smallest criticism. The reason usually goes much deeper than simple pride. It is not only their confidence that feels threatened, it is the entire identity they have spent years trying to protect. The confident image becomes the shield standing between them and painful emotions they have never fully faced. When someone questions that image, points out a weakness, or refuses to provide admiration, it can feel like much more than an ordinary disagreement. It may feel like the foundation holding their emotional world together has started to crack. That is why reactions can become so intense. What seems like a small comment to everyone else may feel overwhelming to them because it challenges the identity they depend upon. Their confidence is often less stable than it appears. And the stronger the mask becomes, the greater the fear that someone might eventually see through it. This also explains why criticism often affects them so deeply. Most people are capable of hearing uncomfortable feedback, feeling disappointed, and eventually moving forward. For someone with strong narcissistic patterns, criticism can feel completely different. It is not experienced as a simple opinion. It is often interpreted as evidence that the carefully protected image is no longer convincing. Because of this, they may become highly defensive, shift blame onto someone else, deny obvious facts, or respond with surprising cruelty. These reactions are usually attempts to protect themselves from emotional pain, rather than thoughtful responses to the situation itself. The false identity they created has become so closely connected to their emotional survival that separating themselves from it feels almost impossible. That is why moments of criticism may trigger reactions that appear extreme or confusing. If these insights remind you of someone you know, continue listening carefully because each pattern makes the next one easier to understand. The more clearly you recognize these emotional defenses, the easier it becomes to identify manipulation, avoid unnecessary confusion, and protect your own emotional well-being. Awareness does not change another person's behavior, but it often changes how you respond to it. Another deeply hidden struggle revolves around a fear that rarely gets spoken about openly. Beneath the need for admiration, beneath the desire to appear exceptional, and beneath the constant search for recognition, there is often an intense fear of becoming insignificant. Many narcissistic individuals are deeply uncomfortable with the idea of blending into the background. Being unnoticed, forgotten, or viewed as ordinary can feel incredibly painful because so much of their identity depends on believing they are different from everyone else. While most people naturally enjoy appreciation, they can usually accept that attention comes and goes. For someone whose self-worth depends on external validation, losing attention may feel far more serious. It can create the frightening feeling that they no longer matter. This is one reason they often struggle when someone else receives praise or recognition. Instead of simply celebrating another person's success, they may quietly compare themselves or feel as though something valuable has been taken away from them. Compliments directed towards someone else may feel like proof that they are becoming less important. Recognition given to another person may be experienced as personal loss rather than shared happiness. Because their self-worth is often measured through comparison, another person's achievements can unintentionally trigger feelings of insecurity. Understanding this does not excuse harmful behavior, but it helps explain why competition, jealousy, and the constant search for attention often become such powerful forces in their lives. Once you begin seeing this hidden fear beneath the surface, many of their actions become much easier to recognize for what they truly are. For many people with strong narcissistic traits, another person's success is not simply something happening in someone else's life. It can feel like a comparison they never wanted to make. Every promotion, every achievement, every compliment directed towards someone else may quietly trigger doubts about their own importance. This struggle often becomes even more noticeable as the years pass. Growing older brings changes that everyone experiences, but for someone whose self-worth depends heavily on outside validation, those changes can feel especially difficult. Physical appearance naturally changes. Social influence shifts, careers evolve. Positions that once brought admiration may no longer carry the same attention. Younger faces begin entering the spotlight, and the admiration that once seemed effortless may become less consistent. The things they relied upon for confidence slowly become harder to maintain. When those external sources of validation begin to fade, emotions they have avoided for years can become much harder to ignore. Stay with me, because what happens next explains why some people become increasingly difficult to deal with as they move through different stages of life. As these changes unfold, their behavior may begin changing as well. Some become much more controlling because they fear losing influence. Others become easily irritated or unexpectedly bitter. Some grow suspicious of the people around them, questioning loyalty even when there is little reason to do so. Others react emotionally in ways that seem unpredictable or confusing. While every person's experience is different, these behaviors can sometimes reflect the growing discomfort of feeling less admired than before. The attention that once arrived naturally may now require much more effort to maintain. Instead of adapting peacefully to life's changes, they may experience them as personal losses. Watching younger people succeed may awaken envy rather than encouragement. Seeing others receive recognition may create anxiety instead of happiness. The world continues moving forward, but instead of viewing that as a natural part of life, they may experience it as proof that they are slowly becoming less important. Beneath these reactions often lies the same fear that has quietly shaped much of their behavior for years, the belief that if they are no longer viewed as exceptional, then they no longer have value. Because that fear remains unresolved, many continue searching for outside validation instead of developing a stronger sense of worth from within. Perhaps the deepest struggle of all involves something many people long for but find extremely difficult to experience. It is genuine emotional closeness. On the surface, many narcissistic individuals appear surrounded by people. They may have romantic partners, family members, loyal friends, professional success, or large circles of admirers. Looking from the outside, it can seem as though they are deeply connected to others. Yet being surrounded by people is very different from feeling emotionally close to them. Real intimacy asks something that feels incredibly uncomfortable to someone who has spent years protecting a carefully built image. It requires honesty about fears. It requires admitting weaknesses. It requires allowing another person to see moments of insecurity without immediately hiding behind confidence or control. For many narcissistic individuals, that level of openness feels threatening rather than comforting. They may willingly share stories, opinions, accomplishments, or carefully selected experiences, but the parts of themselves that feel frightened, uncertain, or emotionally vulnerable often remain locked away. Those hidden emotions stay protected behind walls that few people are ever allowed to cross. Because those emotional walls remain in place, loneliness often continues even when relationships exist. A person may receive admiration from many people and still feel emotionally isolated because admiration cannot replace genuine connection. Attention may temporarily ease uncomfortable feelings, but it rarely satisfies the deeper need to feel fully understood. They may continue searching for closeness through control, praise, influence, or emotional dependence, believing those experiences will finally provide the connection they have been missing. Yet those approaches usually leave them feeling empty once again, because they never reach the kind of emotional honesty that builds lasting trust. Over time, relationships can become increasingly frustrating for both sides. Others may feel they are never truly allowed to know the real person beneath the surface, while the narcissistic individual may quietly wonder why genuine closeness always seems just beyond reach. The painful irony is that the very thing they often need most is the one thing their emotional defenses make hardest to accept. Authentic love grows when two people allow themselves to be seen completely, imperfections included. But when vulnerability feels dangerous instead of safe, opening that door can seem almost impossible. This creates one of the saddest patterns of all. Instead of experiencing emotional safety through honesty, vulnerability may feel like humiliation. Instead of believing that showing weakness could strengthen a relationship, they may fear it will destroy everything they have built. As a result, they continue protecting themselves behind confidence, achievement, and carefully managed appearances, while the emotional closeness they quietly desire remains out of reach. They may stand only a few steps away from the connection they truly need. Yet their own protective habits keep creating distance. Understanding this does not excuse manipulation, dishonesty, or harmful behavior, and it certainly does not mean accepting abuse. It simply offers a clearer picture of the emotional struggles that can exist beneath the surface. When you recognize these deeper patterns, confusing behavior often becomes easier to understand. More importantly, you become better equipped to protect your own emotional well-being, set healthier boundaries, and recognize that lasting connection is built not through appearances, but through honesty, trust, and the courage to be genuinely known. Many people with strong narcissistic patterns spend years searching for closeness while, at the very same time, protecting themselves from the very vulnerability that true closeness requires. They often confuse admiration with genuine love. They mistake having control over someone for having a real emotional bond. They may even believe that keeping someone close through dependence or possession is the same as building a healthy relationship. But those things are very different. Real connection grows through trust, honesty, and emotional openness, while control is built on fear and insecurity. When these misunderstandings eventually begin to fall apart, many struggle to look inward for answers. Instead, they may place the blame on the people around them. Former partners become the problem, friends become untrustworthy, family members become impossible to satisfy, circumstances become unfair. The pattern keeps repeating. Yet the possibility that the same emotional barrier exists within themselves often remains hidden from their awareness. That unseen barrier quietly follows them into every new relationship. It becomes a locked door that they desperately want someone else to open while feeling terrified to unlock it themselves. Stay with me, because recognizing this hidden pattern changes the way you understand everything that follows. Seeing these deeper struggles does not excuse manipulation, emotional abuse, or harmful behavior. It does not erase the pain experienced by the people around them, nor does it remove personal responsibility for the choices they make. But it does offer something important. It replaces confusion with understanding. The person who once appeared completely untouchable begins to look very different. The confidence that seemed so powerful starts to reveal its fragile foundation. The image of someone who always appears to be winning loses much of its illusion. Many people who seem incredibly strong on the outside are quietly fighting battles that almost nobody else can see. Once you understand this, something begins to change inside you as well. Their ability to intimidate you becomes weaker. The emotional grip they once held over your thoughts slowly begins to loosen. Fear gradually gives way to clarity because you stop seeing them as larger than life. Instead, you begin seeing someone who has built an identity around protecting emotional wounds that were never fully healed. That new perspective often becomes the beginning of your own emotional freedom. Eventually, there are moments when the carefully protected image can no longer hold everything together. Admiration fades, relationships end, rejection arrives, success becomes harder to maintain, failures become impossible to ignore. The audience that once provided constant validation begins to disappear. And without that outside reinforcement, the emotional defenses they depended on may begin to weaken. What emerges during those moments is often not the confidence everyone expected to see. Instead, there may be overwhelming sadness, intense anger, deep shame, or emotional pain that feels impossible to understand. Some experience what mental health professionals describe as a narcissistic collapse, a period where the identity they relied upon no longer provides the emotional protection it once did. It is far more than ordinary disappointment. It can feel as though the foundation supporting their entire sense of self is breaking apart. Everything they use to measure their value suddenly feels uncertain, leaving them face to face with emotions they have spent years avoiding. That experience can be deeply painful because it forces them to confront fears that no amount of admiration could permanently silence. Perhaps the saddest part of this journey is that the path toward healing often begins with the very experience they fear the most. Healing usually requires accepting that being imperfect does not make someone unworthy of love. It means recognizing that every person has fears, weaknesses, emotional needs, and moments of failure. Real strength grows from accepting those truths instead of constantly hiding from them. Yet many people with strong narcissistic defenses spend years running in the opposite direction. The harder they work to protect the false image they created, the farther they move away from discovering who they truly are beneath it. As time passes, maintaining that image often becomes more exhausting, while authentic peace remains just out of reach. Understanding this does not mean you should tolerate unhealthy behavior or ignore your own boundaries. Instead, it provides valuable perspective. Awareness allows you to recognize manipulation more quickly. It helps you respond thoughtfully instead of emotionally. Most importantly, it reminds you that protecting your own emotional well-being is always necessary regardless of another person's inner struggles. The next time you meet someone whose confidence seems exaggerated, whose need for admiration never appears satisfied, or whose sense of superiority feels carefully rehearsed, try looking beyond the surface. Remember the emptiness that external success cannot completely fill. Remember the dissatisfaction that often follows even their greatest achievements. Remember the exhausting effort required to protect an image that constantly demands validation. Remember the fear of becoming ordinary that quietly drives so many of their reactions. Remember the closeness they may secretly desire while feeling unable to embrace genuine vulnerability. Most of all, remember that appearances rarely reveal the whole story. Sometimes the people who seem the strongest are carrying the deepest emotional burdens where nobody can see them. The greatest tragedy is not only the pain they may bring into the lives of others, although that pain can certainly be real. It is also the years spent chasing an identity that never truly reflected who they were. They invest enormous energy defending an image built on fear instead of authenticity, while the one thing that could begin changing everything waits quietly on the other side of honesty. The courage to let themselves be seen as they truly are. Not flawless, not extraordinary, simply human, with strengths, weaknesses, and the same need for genuine connection that exists in every one of us.